afternoon, and welcome to Rubbin Minds. My name is Isabella Adediji. Today, we kick the show off with news from the front page. Very recently, the president announced local government autonomy. But when we look at some of the elections that have held across different states in Nigeria, like Kano, like Edo, you find that a single party sweeps all the seats, like the local government elections in Rivers easily comes to mind. What does this say about local government autonomy? Joining me for this conversation is a lawyer, Justice Ogieno. Justice, welcome to Rubbin Minds.
Isabella, it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's go right into the conversation with local government autonomy. I'm sure you've been following some of these elections happening, and what we're seeing is a rinse and repeat as we have in the past year. So what does it say about local government autonomy? Is this just something on paper that hasn't quite translated into the polity?
Okay, I solidly think that it has not translated. It has never translated in the past, and it's looking like it will never ever translate from what we have seen a person to the antecedents of, especially the governors and their role in the purported autonomy of the local government. There was a last-ditch effort so far by the Supreme Court of Nigeria to, through the back door, try to ensure that the local governments get some form of financial autonomy, which is the most important autonomy so far as I'm concerned. But again, is that the best way to achieve it? I know that it's a desperate effort by the federal government, and that's why the Attorney General instituted a suit earlier this year that actually said that it is unlawful and unconstitutional for the governors to practically be in charge of local government financing. But we know from being a constitutional law student in the University of Lagos, I took on one of my lecturers. His name is Dr. Akinola Akitayo, when he was trying to tell us that there are 3 tiers of government in Nigeria, pursuant to our constitution. I told him no, as a student, more than a decade ago, and the situation remains the same. The best way to actually ensure that, in fact and indeed, there's autonomy for the local government in Nigeria is to ensure that the provisions of the constitution is amended to that effect, particularly the provisions of section 7 sub 1 of our constitution and the various other provisions of our constitution that actually allows the state government and the local government to have a shared joint account.
Well, surely financial autonomy is the main one, because if the local government can control its finances, then there is that independence. There's not waiting for the state government to give their blessings, so to say. So if that is in place, why are we seeing the state machinery still at work, where in an election we're seeing a clear sweep? Does it mean that we're not getting enough participation? Is that what it's pointing to? Or is it pointing to the state machinery being at play?
I think it's the state machinery being at play. It is practically impossible, and it goes to show clearly that it has always been a charade, especially when it comes to local government elections. Because how do you logically explain a situation where before a person becomes governor, it is neck and neck, meaning that 2 political parties actually slugged it out, meaning that one party has a stronghold within the state. And when it's now time for local government elections, we now see a situation where one party carries everything, carries the day unanimously. I was laughing when I saw the Rivers State election. It was 22 out of 23. And for me, I was like, how can Simfubara not even get 23 out of 23? When it is the history of our country that all governors get 23 out of 23. But again, it may be to show that, okay, it was indeed free and fair, and people actually competed, and that was why they could win the other one. But generally, we see that the governor is the one that appoints the head of the state electoral body, whatever it is named in various states. And that is the challenge. They pick their henchmen. In Kano, some court actors, Federal High Court, had to make several decisions declaring the chairmanship of that particular chairman of the electoral body in Kano illegal. So he was removed from being the chairman, and some other candidates too were declared illegal to be there. But again, we now saw that some state courts came up and actually gave a directly conflicting decision to that of the Federal High Court. The election wasn't supposed to really hold, but eventually now it held because of conflicting judgments of both the Federal High Court and the State High Court, which is a matter for another day. I invite the leaders of the judiciary that this is an emergency situation that we have to really, really quickly take care of and nip in the bud. Otherwise, we'll have a situation where there may be chaos, because the judiciary, as we must be reminded, is the last bastion that is holding law and order in place in any country.
But I want you to also look at the voters. A lot of times, the local government elections does not receive the same kind of attention that the general elections receives, or even the gubernatorial elections receive. And as a result, we don't see as much people, whether it's on social media or on the streets, campaigning for their councillor, campaigning for their local government chairman. So could the blame also be put on voter apathy? Could it also be that, I don't know, when last did you vote in a local election? Let's start with that.
Don't put me on the spot. Isabella, that's very, very unfair. I feel that, well, it's been a while. I think it's the penultimate one, not the last one. I didn't participate in the last one because it was almost certain who the winner was going to be. So that was why I didn't bother participating in the last one. And it's because of the lack of confidence that I suffered in the penultimate one. So having said that, I think that Nigerians should share maybe the to your tent, O Israel attitude that I'm exuding in this regard. And how do you get to blame them? If the governor has already said, this is the candidate from my party, why should I, if I'm not going to just give my imprimatur in line with what the governor has already said, why am I bothering myself? Because the outcome is already decided in some parts of some secretariat of some office. We saw how brazen this was when the chief of staff to Governor Rotimi Amechi of the Times openly came on air to say it, that they decide, as the chief of staff, they decide who emerges as local government chairman in their respective states. And he was using that to indict fellow chiefs of staffs or fellow governors in other parts of the country. So why should Nigerians bother themselves? Having said this too, we pray that with the autonomy, in quote, that the federal government is trying to bring in through the back door, through the Supreme Court, that it actually comes to play. And as much as possible, I urge and encourage Nigerians that no matter what these politicians do, we mustn't lose faith. We must still keep participating in democratic activities.
But, you mentioned democracy, and if democracy is of the people, by the people, for the people, why are we still seeing that not enough people are coming out for these elections? Could it be that we don't value the seat of the local government? Could it be that our attention is on the state government and the federal government?
And erroneously so. Our attentions have been, most people know their president. Some struggle, yes, they eventually know their governor, but that's about where it ends when it comes to knowledge of, okay, who is even in charge, in a manner of speaking, of my destiny as a Nigerian. We don't know our House of Rep leaders. We never know the local government chairman. It is practically impossible for you to get the average Nigerian to give the first name of who his councillor is. And that's supposed to be the person that is supposed to be closest in the wrong of government in this country. But again, you don't really get to blame the average Nigerian. A lot of confidence and trust has been eroded over the years, not because of their lack of participation or lack of interest, but because of the fact that to a lot of times they have been defied by the resilience of the Nigerian politician that has decided to impose his will at whatever cost on the average Nigerian. We saw the 2023 election, especially at the federal and state levels. And for every Nigerian that for the first time in a long time did not demonstrate so much voter apathy, came out, did everything they could do. They were harassed, they were insulted, they were beaten, some were even slain. Yet they still came out. It would take much more to convince them that let's forget about the past. The future will be better. The future, we trust INEC, we trust Mr. Yakub, we trust every other institution that is supposed to make us have a free and fair election. So that has always been the issue. And if this can be ameliorated, maybe not extinguished, because voter apathy, voter fraud can never ever be extinguished, even in the best places where electoral.
So there needs to be like a restoration of trust so that people can come out to exercise their franchise. Now I want us to move the conversation to the recent cabinet reshuffle. We saw the merging of some ministries, the renaming of some ministries, the creation of new ministries, and that is more of a reflection of, we want to cut down the cost of governance, right? So let us merge some ministries. But then on the same hand, we see the creation of new ministries. What does this tell you about this current administration under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu?
Okay, for me, I think that, well, I'm very happy that at least we're having what's called a cabinet reshuffle. We almost didn't have it in the Buhari government. Even though the president promised us that it was going to take 3 months. It was after 3 months that any minister that doesn't perform is going to be fired. It's better late than never. We had it after 2 years. But where I had challenge was, you fired 5 ministers, you added 7. That mathematics doesn't add up. It means that there is actually an increase from where we are living off. So that said, but I am happy at some persons that have been recruited into the team. For example, the lady in charge of business, watching business, Dr. Jumoke Oduwole, has now been made the substantive Minister of Investment and Trade. I feel that that's a very, very fantastic hire because she has proven her mettle since for about, I think, going on 12 years now. So that's a fantastic hire. And when it comes to maybe a Sunday Dare moved from a substantive minister to a special advisor, there are some things that I may not be able to say because I don't think that's a promotion, that's a demotion. So let's even say that 6 people were fired from being ministers because of him. But some other ministers that were fired, especially the Uju Ohane, I don't know how she stayed that long. I don't know how she made 2 straight years in that office because from the get-go, she has not been a person that I consider befitting for the office of a minister of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, sitting on the table of the Federal Executive Council, maybe bi-weekly or every month, as it is now. It used to be every week. So with such things, I'm not really happy. I just pray that with the best efforts of the president, he feels that, okay, he has now moved to the A team now. The dividends of democracy should be enjoyed by the average Nigerian people. They said they've reduced the number of persons that are following them. They are convoy and
yes, there are aides. But I want you to look at square pegs in square holes. So, for example, you had the Honourable Minister of Health, Dr. Tunji Alausa, being moved to education. So what does that say? We had a health practitioner running a health ministry, and now we see that person in education.
Okay, Isabella, in as much as it is desirable to let a person who actually is a practitioner in a particular field be able to head a cabinet position, that's desirable. But we must also remind ourselves that the work of a minister essentially is administration. I've been in ministries, I've had engagement with ministers. I know that it is a very, very cumbersome one. You must be an ace administrator rather than being an ace in the field where you are in, because essentially what you are called upon to do is to run an army of people and get an army of people to implement the policies of Mr. President or whoever, maybe at the government level, a governor. So you have to be hands-on on that. If you are not very, very good with that, especially with a particular ministry, you should actually be fired. That's generally my take. So now moving the person from a core ministry of his area of competence, which he is supposed to be able to do better in, to another ministry, it leaves a lot to be desired. But again, Isabella, this is politics. There are lots that you and I don't know.
And you mentioned in your earlier answer that yes, we've seen the merging of ministries, but we've also seen, additional ministries. And what comes to mind is this livestock. What's wrong with livestock being under agriculture? Is it necessary to have a specialized ministry as such?
For me, if you ask me simplicity as a Nigerian, I would say no. There is no need for it not to be underneath the Ministry of Agriculture. But we have a situation where it has been an incendiary issue over the years in Nigeria. I think it's even more than a century old now when it comes to the particular issue of farmer-herder clashes. If there is a way to do it in a sense that the average Nigerian will still be able to live in any part of Nigeria where he wants to live, the far-flung places in Benue, far-flung places in Kaduna, far-flung places in Zamfara, without the cattle coming to disrupt the farmlands, I feel that anything and everything we can possibly do to buy that peace, maybe in a political way, let's compromise and just get it done so that we should face development, because we are having a bigger issue on our hand, which is food security. And food security as an issue is caused by these incessant and perpetual clashes. So I feel that anything and everything that we can do in order to make food arrive at on the table of the average Nigerian at the lowest possible cost should be done. And if it means creating this ministry to get that done, I endorse it.
So now let's look at the scorecard. So, there are some ministers that, like you said, you're happy to see them go. But there are some ministers that have remained, and Nigerians are asking questions. For example, let's look at the Ministry of Power. I can't count how many times the grid, has collapsed in the past few weeks, months. And we've seen increased tariffs. Yet it's almost like you're paying more, but getting less. So how come we see the Minister of Power being retained?
Okay, for the Ministry of Power, I feel that it can't be the voice of Nigerians that's still making him retain that office. It must be the voice of some stakeholders that we don't know, because as it is, it has become a cash generating cow for them. Maybe the companies, the GEMCOs, of course, the Transmission Company of Nigeria, and the DISCOs. Maybe it has become a cash cow for them. And the fact that to a large extent, maybe the president is somehow happy because he's not having to pay what they call subsidy on power again because of him being there. Him being there as a bulldog, because I have not even seen a minister that lacks the PR requirements of a person that is seated on the cabinet. This is a minister that just talks practically almost anyhow, with all due respect to him. It was the one that faced Nigerians and told Nigerians to turn off their freezers and turn off. He said we are using our freezers too much. Is that how to talk to a country that is in pain? So I feel that the major reason why he's retaining his office is that the president wants him. Some other IMF, World Bank, and every other person that has been telling the president to deregulate, and they must be the persons preserving him in power. Because if you leave it to the average Nigerian, they cannot wait for him to have packed his bag and left.
Thank you so much, Justice Ojeno. That's all we can take on this segment.
It's my pleasure.
Welcome back to Rubbin Minds. Now, when you think sports in Nigeria, what comes to mind? Football, right? Soccer, but also athletics. And very recently, we've seen a third sport come to dominate in Nigeria, and I'm talking about basketball. Given the impressive, the stellar performance of the Nigerian, the Tigress, at the Olympics, the Paris 2024 Olympics, where they were the first African team, both either men or women, to play in a quarterfinals. Indeed, there has been a resurgence, there's been more interest, there's been more adoption of basketball here in Nigeria. And I know that has also extended to the continent of Africa. And this hasn't happened by chance. We have organizations that have been working tirelessly behind the scenes to see this adoption at the grassroots. Joining me on Rubbin Minds today is Bimsola Abudu, who is the NBA Africa Vice President and Country Head of NBA Nigeria. Welcome to Rubbin Minds.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Well, as a leading voice in African basketball, what excites you the most about the new season? I know for me, I'm more interested after the girls performed so well, and I can't wait to even see more performances, see more basketball games. But for you, what excites you?
I mean, several things I find very exciting about the new season. We kicked off the new season this past week. And I think I'll start by saying that in Nigeria, several of the grassroots programs we have coming up, it's quite exciting. We have an elite basketball camp that we host once a quarter that gives young, talented athletes in Nigeria the opportunity for them to sort of showcase their skills to coaches in NBA Africa. And what that means is they get the opportunity to be selected for some of the programs we do in different parts of the world. And I would say the first one we launched in Nigeria was in July. And I'm proud to say that 2 of the kids there were selected to be part of the NBA Academy and have now moved to Senegal for the Academy. And just, I think, NBA season just as a whole, I mean, I know we all saw the debut of LeBron and his son, like the first father-son duo ever in the history of the NBA to play together. And bringing it back here locally as well, we rolled out a really cool campaign that's called My NBA Moment NG. So we're getting our NBA fans here in Nigeria and in the diaspora for them to share with us their favorite NBA moment. And the first video actually we launched was with the head coach of the Nigerian women's national team. You have the likes of Akim Watosho, who's a filmmaker who made a movie about Giannis and his family. So just really engaging our fans, where for us, the work we do here, we focus on grassroots, but at the same time, as we focus on grassroots, is increasing the viewership of NBA games and giving people the opportunity to engage with the brand. And I would say we're actually the number 2 sport in Nigeria.
Yes. So you were taking
football,
athletics.
yes, we're number 2 in Nigeria. The most watched and also participated team sports in Nigeria is basketball. Yeah.
And what would you say resonates with people at the grassroots? Because there's a lot of belief in football as an economic, a viable career. They've seen so many Nigerians go to play in all the big leagues across the world. But at the grassroots, as you engage with them, how do they begin to see basketball as that viable number 2 sport in Nigeria?
The interesting thing is a lot of them do already. I mean, when you talk about basketball in Africa, the first person that comes to mind is Akim Olajuwon, who was drafted in 1984, and he really was the one who opened Africa to the world when it comes to basketball. And we look at, since then in the history of the NBA, you've had over 120 players of African descent, and more than half of those are Nigerians. So the reality is, like, Nigerians already play basketball, already engage in basketball. So in the grassroots level, you find a lot of the kids that participate in some of the programs we do, and even when we go into the communities, they're really excited about basketball. I think for one of the things you mentioned about it being a viable sport, and I think sports just as a whole is one of the key things that, I'll say the NBA and a lot of stakeholders in the sports industry just really trying to demonstrate sports as a business, right? So beyond just the talent, it's like you have to look at the whole ecosystem of the sports industry and showing that whether it's sports tourism, sports medicine, sports retail, all the different facets, and showing that it's just a viable industry as the next. And why does that matter to the youth? Is if you don't become a basketball player, not everybody's going to become a basketball player, right? But there's so many opportunities within the value chain of basketball that you can become a sports lawyer. You can be a lawyer that focuses on, for all the athletes, they have agents. You can be a manager. You can be an operator like myself. So really just showing that being able to acquire those skills, the fundamental skills of basketball from a grassroots level. But what's so unique about this sport than most, and if I may say, is like while kids are learning fundamental skills of basketball, we're equipping them with life skills that stays with them for the rest of their life.
Hmm. So my next question will be to look at some of those initiatives that
Yeah.
you mentioned.
Yeah.
You spoke about the ones at the grassroots.
Yes.
How are these initiatives not just raising the profile of basketball in
Yeah.
Nigeria and by extension on the continent, but how
Yeah.
are they also enriching lives? Like you spoke about those skills that
Yeah.
they also learn, those life skills.
So, I mean, I think that's a really good question because for the programs we do on the grassroots level, I see them as nation building programs. They're social development programs. And why would I say that? I look at our global junior MBA curriculum. We were very intentional to modify that to address the realities in Nigeria. And what I mean by that is we looked at research, and what research said, what are some of those 4 skills that your average Nigerian kid will require for the future of work? And those 4 skills being leadership skills, critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and communication skills. And we modified our global curriculum to focus, to emphasize that. So what does that mean? It's like a kid is enjoying learning how to play basketball. At the same time, they're learning these skills in a fun environment that they don't even realize that those skills are being instilled in them at that moment. And for us, that's very important because with the MBA, no matter where we go, no matter where we do business, it's about how are we giving back to the environment that we exist in. And for us, I think just in Nigeria as a whole, we know that Nigeria is the purveyor of culture in Africa right now. And it's one of the reasons why in 2022, we launched the MBA Meets Culture platform, focused on the 5 pillars of culture being art, fashion, film, music, and tech. And we've come up with very interesting programs within those different pillars and ensuring that it helps to elevate and spotlight Nigerians. And I say this is in Africa now, Africans in that space. And I'll say the first one everyone talks about whenever you mention this is the halftime show that happened last year with Burna Boy, Thames, and Rema. It was the first time ever in the history of the NBA where you had an African perform, talk less of having 3 Africans, and it was an Afrobeat themed halftime show. I mean, I think one thing we're quite excited about that we just concluded in September is we launched an accelerator in April of this year, and the accelerator is a Pan-African program where it's how do we spotlight and elevate startups in the sports and in the creative industry? How to give them access to capital? How we give them access to the MBA network? And I'm happy to say that we took 10 finalists from Africa to New York for them to pitch to business leaders and dignitaries a demo day at the MBA headquarters along the sidelines of the UNGA. 4 of the finalists were Nigerians, I would say. And it was great, just amazing, inspiring night. And we narrowed it down to the top 4. And number 1 was Nigerian, Tix Africa. And number 2, Salibuta, and really cool, innovative ideas to 10 issues. And it goes back to what are the different things that we're doing, that how is the MBA taking its brand and what we do, and really showing people that even with basketball, everything we do, basketball is the hero, but we do a lot of work beyond what people would typically think that it's just about playing basketball.
Yes.
It's critical, and that's the core of our business. But at the same time, we know that MBA is culture. So how do we seamlessly find a way to embed the brand in different elements of culture?
And listening to you, I can just see the value chain and the opportunities. Like you said, not everybody will bounce that ball and throw that basket, but there's so many opportunities. And to have those things come to life, those initiatives come to life, how important has the partnerships been? The role of government, for example, the regulatory bodies. Tell us about that.
I think no one can build an industry on their own, right? And no one can pretend to. I think partnerships are very crucial. I think for us, there are 2 types of partnerships. You have the other corporations working with us. So I think I mentioned the Triple Double Accelerator. I mean, I would say our partners were Karamo Capital. We had Paystack as a partner, and NUTM. And you have different organizations working with us to enable these programs to happen because we can't do all of it by ourselves, right? This investment, it has to be that critical mass of investment that really enables the building of a value chain. I think from a government standpoint, I mean, I'd say that's very important as well because having government support in whatever you do. And one of the key things that I would say happened in Nigeria that was very important for anyone who's a sport practitioner is the reclassification of sports from being just mere recreational to actually being a business sector. So that means 1, it's being taken seriously that this is a business. So that's great. I think the second thing is Oh, I know that was just a recent
Yes,
shuffle.
where they moved the Ministry of Sports.
Yes. But prior to that, that Minister of Sports, Senator John, had worked very closely with us in terms of what are some of the key policies that are important for development of sports in Nigeria. And we look forward to the president of the National Sports Commission, and how we can work closely with him as well to ensure that we're all working collectively to develop this industry in Nigeria.
Yeah, I'm just listening to you. I'm just really interested, because I think a lot of people, they spend so much of their time, their money, on these other sports like football, for example. But looking at the viability of basketball, especially what you're doing to raise a new generation. How hopeful are you that, one day basketball will be that leading sport where maybe instead of, buying the jerseys, for example, of some of the foreign teams, this time we'll be buying Nigerian jerseys, we'll be wearing them. And just like the Hakeem Olajuwon craze will just be all on our lips.
You know what? I don't think we're too far away from that. I mean, this work that we're doing, that the NBA is doing, the reality is a lot of people had already set the foundation for it, right? You've had a lot of individuals who have paved the way and sort of tilted the soil before we came here and really given us the opportunity to build on top of that. And I truly believe that with the work we're doing from a grassroots level, and I love what you said, that how many kids will bounce basketball from the moment a child picks up a basketball as a kid all the way down to when they play professionally, is really defining what that pathway is. And the more we work with other stakeholders to really define that pathway and bring others along, I'm very confident that it's only a matter of time that would happen. I think it is worth stating when you say Nigeria, I mean, wearing Nigerian jerseys, a lot of people do wear a lot of the Nigerian players' jerseys already. You have the likes of your Precious Achua, you have OG. But what's very interesting is that for NBA Africa, NBA started a local league in Africa about 5 years ago called the Basketball Africa League. And it's a joint venture between the NBA and FIBA. And the whole idea is, how do we get basketball players in Africa to play on the continent and make money doing that on the continent? And I would say our Rivers Hoopers, they represented Nigeria in season 4 that concluded in May, and they came in 3rd place. I mean, they really represented. And I can tell you that with the investment the NBA is making through the BAL, you find that more teams across the continent, right, are finding ways to engage more in basketball. So I think it's just only a matter of time that you bring all these coordinated efforts together, you will see more, for sure. You see more basketball, that maybe you see more kids bouncing balls versus kicking the balls in the future.
Right. So what role do you think NBA Africa can play in fostering diversity? Because that's really big now, and inclusion, especially through basketball, particularly in Nigeria. So that whole diversity and inclusion is so important in the sport. I
think it's the core of what the NBA represents. And the way it shows up for us here in our programs is we make sure that we give young boys and young girls the same opportunity, right? I mean, one thing everyone says is that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not everywhere. And we ensure that how are we giving both young boys and young girls the opportunity to not just to play, but to get the opportunity for their talent, for them to be seen, and what are the different avenues. So when I talk about our junior MBA, I'm talking about, it's called our junior MBA, junior WMBA programming. So for every camp that we have, or every clinic that we have, we always really aim to have the same amount of boys and girls playing, because that's, I mean, and I say it's not a big deal. Like, that's just how business should be done at this point. It shouldn't be something where it's like diversity being something that you have to aim for. It should just be the way you exist at this point. I would like to believe that the way a lot of organizations exist, and we're very intentional in that with our grassroots programming, and even down to, I would say, whenever from our cultural activations as well, whenever we're working with influencers, are we ensuring that we have a balanced amount of men and women, making sure that the playing field is just constantly leveled is a big part of how I would say, we show up as a business here.
And you've been saying a lot of great things, a lot of the successes you've built on a very strong foundation, but I'm sure in the midst of it all, there are challenges.
Absolutely.
And what are some of those challenges, and how are you able to surmount them?
I mean, I think the biggest challenge for us in Nigeria is infrastructure. with football, for example, like you mentioned, you can pick up a ball and kick a ball anywhere. With basketball, that's not the case. Like, you need a rim, you need a court. So really ensuring that, how do we ensure that the average Nigerian kid has access to a basketball court? And that's been it's been a problem, and it's one of the reasons why, if I look at the work we're doing, where we're building courts, we're refurbishing courts, and working with partners as well to build courts. You already have so many other individuals, and I'll give a good example, like the Giants of Africa Foundation, where they're building basketball courts across Nigeria. So if they bring the hardware, the job of the NBA is we figure out, how do we find a way to bring the software, like the programming on there. And it's one of the things that we're working on and trying to figure out right now, is that you have individuals that have built basketball courts. There's some rundown courts. How can the NBA go there and help in refurbishing the courts? If you look at Campus Court on Lagos Island, we refurbished that court with the community there to give the kids there and all the schools around there the opportunity for them to play. We have a court as well in Ikorodu. It's doing things like that. Like in Abuja, we have several schools we adopted and refurbished basketball courts. That's kind of how the infrastructure has been a challenge, but I always see every challenge as an opportunity, as how do we get corporate partners to say, think of the likes of your...
So like the leveraging the partnerships. And in your earlier answer, you spoke about a challenge that's going on. I think my NBA Moment Challenge. Can you tell us about that?
A campaign. Oh, yes. I think this is, as a basketball fan, I find this to be a very interesting campaign. And I think everyone should get involved in it. So we launched this campaign to celebrate the NBA season. It's going to be an all-year campaign. It's called My NBA Moment NG. I know our fans all have exciting moments, whether it's a game-winning shot they saw, whether it's the first game they ever experienced, or when they came to any of our events. So we want our fans all around Nigeria and in the diaspora for them to share a video, 30 to 40 seconds with us, and for them to follow us on any of our social media accounts, and hashtag My NBA Moment NG, and you're going to see a lot of that coming up this year. And I would say you should record as well. You record your NBA moment. It can be anything, like, just because, like, we find that when fans are talking about their favorite moments, people get excited about it. So we want them to relive those moments with us. And for those who don't have an NBA moment yet, why don't you create one with us? You can sign up for League Pass and watch a game, and you can share your experience on that game with us, or find a way to attend one of our events here in Nigeria.
Thank you so much, Gbemisola Abudu, and wish you all the best with this new season.
Thank you very much. It was such a pleasure being here.
Thank you. Welcome back to Rubbin Minds. Now, growing up in Nigeria, the media was all about the traditional media. So you're thinking the television, the radio, you're thinking about the print media, the newspapers, the magazines. But over the past decade, especially with the explosion, the adoption of broadband internet, we've seen the meteoric rise of online media, blogs, podcasts. Different news outlets have popped up on the internet. And while some of the traditional media outlets have found their way in that online space, we have a new brand of journalism. I'm talking about people like you and me holding mobile phones, becoming citizen journalists. And as a result, we're seeing a lot of people with their smartphones. Something happens, the first thing they do is to record it, put it up on the internet, and before you know it, that's news. Now, what are the implications with all this recording? Do we have code guiding them? What about the question of ethics? Now, to discuss this and more, I have with me the program manager at Witness, Nkem Agunwa. So you're the Africa program manager at Witness. Right. So tell me, in your experience, how has the smartphone technology changed the face of journalism?
Thank you so much for having me. I think that is such an important question. It has completely transformed the face of journalism. Like you did say it yourself, citizen journalism. We now have citizen journalists. You and I, anyone really can, with a snap of a button, film incidents that are newsworthy, including incidents of rights violations or just very important happenings around them, and record that in real time, and also with the power of social media, distribute that as well in real time. So we see that the traditional gatekeepers are completely taken off. And I think that it has really built people power. It's also allowed people to understand that their voices count, their voices matter, and they can use the devices in their hands to shine the spotlight on issues that have before now been relegated to the background.
But I'm sure you've come across instances where somebody brings out a mobile phone and they're abused, they're fought, they're injured, and it becomes a problem. How much has this deterred citizens from bringing out their mobile phones to record vital evidence that is also newsworthy?
I think this has deterred quite significantly. One thing that we always push for is, if it is not safe to document, to film, do not do that. So the mobile camera in some ways is a shield, but at the same time, it could introduce some vulnerabilities. We've seen instances where the perpetrators, once you pull out a phone camera, it immediately agitates them, and it could put you in immediate danger. It could also cause you to be targeted, right? And so the idea is not for you to film and completely lose your safety, or there's a threat to your life. Is that you're able to film, and the visual evidence can be used for justice and accountability mechanisms. We also put out ways in which you can do this safely, and also to do it ethically. So we always recommend that it has to be safe first, and then film from a distance. You don't have to be super close to the incident to be able to document what's going on. You could film and narrate what you're seeing, right? And we also caution that when you do that, ensure that you do not infuse your biases, because that completely compromises the evidence that you're trying to document. And it's also important to note that you do not always have to film when the incident is going on. You can come back later, and there are still critical pieces of evidence that you can film after the violation might have happened.
Yeah, I'm just listening to you. I'm reflecting on some of the newsworthy things that I see online, and it brings up the question, like you just touched on ethics. So when you have children involved, where there's nudity involved, or even when it's a very sensitive case, for example, someone trying to take their life, trying to jump off a bridge, and the next thing you see is people bringing out mobile phones. Can you speak to us more around the ethics of this citizen journalism?
It is a critical issue. While we have the right to document, because that is part of our fundamental human rights, particularly the right to freedom of expression, we also have a responsibility to ensure that when we film, we do not cause harm. We have a duty to do no harm, right? And that could include that first, before you film, where possible, administer an informed consent. People have to consent that you have them in your footage. There are ways to film an incident without recording distinct identifiable features in people, right? There are ways to film vulnerable communities, for example, because you must ensure that you do not re-traumatize the survivors, that you do not expose a community that's already being targeted to further violations. So these are things that must be carefully considered. And also we have to be active bystanders. It can't be that there is something happening where someone is in grave danger and the first instinct is to pull out your phone. If you can help, if it is safe for you to provide other forms of support, then that should be the first consideration over and above every other considerations. In some instances, the best decision in that moment is to film, because you do not have the agency to provide any form of support. But you can film to bear witness that that violation happened, with the hope that accountability can be brought.
Earlier on, you mentioned how traditional media, radio, television, newspapers, magazines have been the gatekeepers, but now we've seen citizen journalists come to the scene. Do you see potential for a convergence where, instead of one being the gatekeeper and the other not being so much a gatekeeper, it's all these different forms of media all working together?
I think that should be it. It's where citizen journalists can't replace traditional journalism, right? Both play very significant roles in the society, and there should be a convergence. Um, with citizen journalism, unfortunately, we do not have guardrails. There are no regulation. It is not standardized. So the people still rely on traditional media outfits for the confirmation of the information that they receive from citizen journalists. And I do know that traditional media as well, in some cases, rely on citizen journalists as sources. So I really see that there is a situation where it should be a relationship that is complementary. We all really need each other, and there should rather be it should be a conversation of how do we create systems by which we could work together, and not systems where both compete amongst each other.
I'll take you back to that answer about the lack of guardrails. So you don't really have, like, say, on television, there's a code, and if you violate the code, there are punishments, right? A citizen journalist brings out their phone, they record anything, and there's almost no implication. Now, doesn't that run the risk of having people with vested interest to plant people and use the citizen journalism media as a form to push certain propaganda?
I think that the issue of propaganda has been one that has been with us since arguably humanity. There's always been people who are trying to skew narratives, trying to influence people's decisions from the time of even before photography and before media as we know it to be today. And so today's time is not different with citizen journalism and with different forms of media manipulation that allows that to happen more seamlessly. I think that what is important to note is with every phenomenon, there is the upside and there is the downside. There's been tremendous benefit to having people like you and I have devices in their hands that they can film and document violations where they happen. And a number of citizen journalists or frontline defenders risk their lives in the most dangerous situations in order to uncover critical evidence of rights violations. And so I think that we have to find ways in which we can leverage that. How do we build support from the community level in ways that citizen journalists understand how to do this and how to do this effectively, how to do it ethically, and more importantly, how they can do this safely?
And just listening to your answer, you said the immense benefits. So are there clear examples where citizen journalism has made a huge difference, whether it's in a case, whether it's in raising awareness? Share with us.
I think there's been so many examples to demonstrate that, even when we go down to just the beginning of smartphones and cameras everywhere. So I will give you one example. A number of us might be familiar with the Alu-4 killing, the unfortunate killing of the young men in Rivers State. And I remember at the time I received it on my BlackBerry phone. It was distressing, but it was there. And those footage were relied on in the court of law to reach justice, right? The perpetrators were held accountable, and the judge specifically relied on the relevance of that visual evidence in order to hold the perpetrators accountable. We might also remember the Elisha Abo incident. So this was not a citizen video. It was a CCTV, but there again, we also see that it was relied on by the judge to grant compensation to the applicant. In this case, it was Womet, and she was awarded 50 million. Recently, we saw the Judicial Panel of Inquiry here in Lagos State relying on visual evidence from the NSAS protest to award compensation to specifically Felicia Opara. So there are many instances where visual evidence documented by ordinary people on the streets have been relied on in the court of law to reach justice. But we also know that the court of law is not the only the only mechanism for accountability. There's been different ways where campaigners have used video evidence to advocate to policymakers to cause a change in policies. So it's such a powerful tool that I think that we have to continue to leverage.
Yeah, and how has the government reacted to this, this online technology, citizen journalism, and are you expectant of maybe legislation around this, code, the regulation? And that will be my final question.
Well, I could stay here longer if you wanted. We unfortunately, there's been a clampdown on citizen journalism, where we've had instances where people have been arrested because they may not necessarily have been the creators of the video, but they distributed it on social media. Some people have had trumped up charges against them, but our laws actually protect the right for us to film law enforcement agents in the course of their work. And the right to record is a right that is protected, and is a right that ensures that there's transparency, there's accountability. We really would want the government to really protect this right, to see that when there is a free society, when people can express themselves, including through visual evidence, we have a progressive society. We have an accountable society. So that's what I would want to see.
Thank you very much, Nkem Agunwa, Africa Program Manager at Witness. Thank you for being our guest on Rubbin Minds.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll be closing the show on that note. My name is Isabella Adediji. Do join us same time, same place next week. Have a great afternoon.